Kia ora everyone, Troy Hammond here, and that means that you're listening or watching the We Fucking Love Startups podcast. And so in today's episode, we're chatting with Levi Fawcett. I've been wanting to talk to Levi for a long time. I've been watching their story at Partly and been really impressed. And so we're going to be chatting today about his story, how he came out of Rocketlab, founded Partly, and how and why it's growing and growing and growing. And he's going to talk through like the different challenges that he's had along the way. We're going to talk through, what drives him, where he gets his information from. And it's a super fascinating chat. So strap in, you're going to enjoy this one.
Kia ora. Thanks for tuning in to the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, brought to you by Talent Army.
Where did you get your work ethic, performance culture from?
Well, where do we start? Probably growing up. So I had a pretty strange upbringing, right? I was homeschooled for a big chunk of that. I think a huge portion of that was just working. And then as I started working for real, I didn't think I was going to be super employable. And so I thought, I've got to make up for this by working harder than everyone else.
Yeah.
So
Why did you not think that you would be employable?
Well, you don't know what you don't know, I guess. Yeah. I didn't do a lot of academia when I was younger. It was a lot of building things. Like I built go-karts and I just made things, did projects. Didn't
you found 4 companies during university?
I did, yeah, I had. But that was also the same reason. I didn't think I'd be super employable, and so I was like, well, got to control my own destiny here. Mm-hmm. And yeah, the 1 year of high school I did, I came in super green, did year 13, which is the final year of high school. Yeah. Didn't know a lot of the real fundamentals and kind of had to learn it all on the fly. And so that was kind of me saying, well, look, I got to work harder than everyone else. That's my competitive advantage. Yeah. And then throughout university, that kind of carried through. And over time, I just kind of got used to it. Kind of broke everything down into these first principles, fundamentals. What do I actually care about? University, it was understanding the point in things, how things worked, as opposed to memorizing things, and that gave me a lot of time to go off and run companies. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It was kind of a combination of that upbringing, knowing that I had to work harder than everyone else. Yeah. And that carried through. Rocketlab was I loved Rocketlab. Yeah. But that was a ton of work.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you get into Rocketlab?
I got recommended by one of the lecturers. So Rocketlab had reached out to the uni and said, is there anyone amazing who could come and work on the hardware simulator, which is a GNC, guidance navigation control simulation system, hardware simulation. Yeah. And it was kind of middle of the year. And so not many other students wanted to do it because you kind of had to go and start working full time and then do your second semester at the same time. Yeah. But I was like, perfect, this is great. I'll drop uni if I have to. Yeah. And so I think I was one of the few people that were willing to do that. And so I did. I just said, yep, I'll be there next week. I think it was like a Tuesday, and they said, can you be there full time on Monday in Auckland? And so I said, yep, sweet as. and that's exactly how it worked. And so I worked sort of 5 days a week. I'd come back to Christchurch and just finished my last semester on the weekends. And so super fun.
It's funny, right? Like, because I talk about performance culture a lot, and like like everyone's like, oh, hustle culture is frowned upon now and all these things, and I'm like, oh, fuck that. I think you've got to hustle, right, if you want to be successful, and you've got to ultimately say yes to opportunities when they come up. And I think that's largely, if I was to summarize, like a lot of people that I sit across from this podcast table with and chat with, they've just said yes at opportunities where a lot of people have said no, and then they've just said, oh, I'll figure it out. I back myself to figure it out, or I'll die trying,
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, when I look back and say what decisions did I make that led to more successful things, it's probably correlated to just saying yes to more things, right? And then the odds of one of them being a good decision were higher. Yeah. And there's no doubt there's a super high correlation between hard work and success, right? Like you'd be pretty ignorant to say that there isn't. Yeah. Maybe there's some aspect of hustle culture where, if you're not working in the office at 10 p.m., that's not ideal. Yeah. But I mean, the reality is it does come down to caring a lot having some kind of mission, something that you want to achieve, and then working super hard to get there.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference in hustle culture, right? Like hashtag hustle culture. There's a difference between hustling just because your boss tells you to hustle, and I fucking believe in this mission so much that I don't care what hours I work because I just lose track of time, right? Yep. And I think that's like the hustle culture for me is when you believe in it, go hard at it, man. Like just really like dive deep into it, throw yourself into the most uncomfortable situations because you're just going to grow so much.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
What else? So what else did you learn apart from that you were prepared to jump on a plane and say yes when you went to Rocketlab?
During the time at Rocketlab,
because there's a bit of a team of people that have come out of that era now and starting companies and doing really well. So there's obviously some traits there.
Yeah, I mean, Rocketlab was super interesting. Probably one of the biggest takeaways from Rocketlab was just the level of ambition. Pete is ridiculously ambitious, like irrationally ambitious, I think, sometimes, which is a good thing. I love it. But what it meant, you kind of see how these companies actually grow, right?
Yeah.
When you look at the Silicon Valleys and these success stories, I guess the victors write the history books, right?
Yeah, the origin stories get written by the marketing department.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And so you see all these successful Silicon Valley companies, and you go, man, they must be brilliant. Or have some genius strategy, and they've come out of some Google, and they've put together this plan, they've executed on it, and then you find out the reality was just everything was this massive dumpster fire. There were about 15 different times where the company was about to go under.
Yeah.
They pushed into some grey areas, right? Just to
got sued a bunch of times.
Yeah. You look at Uber. If that company had failed at any point, it would have gone down as this massive. History would have said it was a terrible idea, and it was they'd done everything wrong.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, and so I think kind of being on the inside, you just realize that's reality, and there's this massive distortion field, and it just gives you a lot more wiggle room where you kind of just can pattern match and say, well, actually, I can see how this is possible. You don't have to have everything in place. You're building well ahead of where you think you are. You come across these crazy challenges and you think, how are we going to recover from this?
Yeah.
You find a way. You promise things that are just unreasonable at the start.
Yeah.
And you kind of find a way to deliver on it, or mostly deliver on it, or if you don't deliver on it, then find some way of making up for that. Partly are at the point now where we're not having to do that anymore, but we definitely did at the start, right? It was just the one thing we have to do is make it really easy for buyers to find the right parts. That's our fundamental kind of guiding principle.
That's a big audacious goal, right? Because you're dealing with like manufacturers all over the world, and I know. So I was talking to the guys at Bike Matrix recently. I think they've had a conversation with you, just trying to do the similar thing with mountain bikes.
Correct. Yeah.
And he was telling me about the challenges they're having, and I was like, man, partly must be having some serious challenges as well in terms of like identifying them all from the start.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we've had to have this insanely high bar on the engineering side. So right now we get about 4,000 applicants a month.
Yeah.
We hire about four. So we're hiring about one in 500 across the company on average, which is super high. Yeah.
When people hear that, right, like I hear this a lot, and I work with high growth startups, and so for me it's like, yeah, of course, right? But when people hear that, they're like, arrogant bastards, right? And can you talk me through why that is, just so that people can understand that?
Sure. And there's probably an element of truth in that. There has to be certainly a level of arrogance, or at least extreme confidence.
Well, mate, you've got to be a crazy, arrogant idiot to be a founder in the first place, right?
I think so, yes. Yeah. But the reason that's tricky is it's not necessarily your everyone else is average.
Yeah.
There's a specific thing that we need to do. We're not going to hire unless we are super clear on exactly what that person is doing, right? And we made that mistake early on where we said, well, we just need to find great people and we'll figure it out. And that can be true in some areas, but then as you grow, you need more specialists, and you just have to find people that can grow at the pace the company is growing, right? And so you're kind of finding that balance. And I think that's probably been why that bar is so high. I mean, from a technical perspective, we're dealing with about 20% web scale data. So you think like the amount of data that's on Google Internet, we're dealing with 20% of that. There's 150 million different parts. There's, different, like physically different parts, about 20 million different vehicle configurations. And then we map that out globally. There's billions of cars, hundreds of billions of parts, and you've got to build all of these relationships between them. Our customers combined have about 140 million monthly active users. And so when you kind of compare that amount of data, terabytes of really structured data to most of the problems that New Zealand's familiar with, that's why it gets hard, is you've really got to find people
who've got that level of scale,
that have got that level of scale, that are not just building these
websites.
That's right.
Yeah, I get that, man, completely. And so talk us through. So for people that are listening to this, there'll be lots of people, watching and listening to this because they see it's your episode, they want to hear the story, they know the story, but there's some people that might not know your story, right? And so what is Partly?
So let's start at the top.
I heard this morning, actually, it wasn't called Partly in the first place, right?
And no, it's always been called Partly, but we had a company prior to Partly that kind of turned into Partly.
Got it, yeah.
So it was called All Goods. It was designed to make it really easy for SMEs to get online. We would kind of structure and standardize the data. We built a marketplace off the back of that, and combined, I think we had 400,000 monthly users and just over 1,000 business customers. But it was very general. There was no deep defensibility, no real business moat.
Yeah.
And so
looked for your niche.
Yeah, that's exactly right. We couldn't see ourselves spending the next 10 years working on it, put it that way. And it was actually off the back of that Partly started. When we started Partly, we said Partly has one goal. It's to make it as easy as possible for buyers to find the right part.
Yeah.
We said our mission is to connect the world's parts. That's not necessarily automotive. Maybe this is the 10-year super aspirational goal.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that's the mission, connecting the world's parts. And to do that, we have to make it really easy for buyers to find the right parts.
Yeah.
And then we kind of broke the problem down from there. So in terms of what Partly actually do, if you imagine you are the type of person that fixes your own car, or you want a part for your car, let's say you're looking for like a headlight, it's crashed into something.
Yeah.
There's only a very specific number of headlights that are going to fit your car. So if you went to a trade and you searched for a headlight, you're going to see 20,000, 30,000 headlights, a lot of headlights, and maybe 20 of them are going to fit your car.
Yeah.
We build all of the structure around that, linking parts and vehicles, so that it is really easy for buyers to find the right parts.
So when you say parts and vehicles, you mean by my car license plate, plug that in, and then I'll know what my car is, and so then I'll know what the parts are?
That's exactly right, yeah.
Yeah.
And it turns out that relatively simple sounding problem is pretty much unsolved today globally, because there's so much data, so much complexity behind it. Every vehicle is different at some level, right? Is it, how is it built? Which production line did it come off? And there's just under $2 trillion USD spent every year on car parts alone.
Shit.
So,
well, you can tell that, like, every time I go, like Amazon or eBay, right? You look at, there's lots of car shit going on in there.
Absolutely, there is. Yeah. And the whole consumer thing, you or I buying parts, that's the smaller chunk of the market, right? The bigger chunk of the market is your garages, workshops, anything on the repair side, which is where we're biasing more and more.
Yeah, awesome, man. Hey, so when people heard you were coming on the podcast, I always asked, and if you've got any questions, let me know. One question that came in straight away was, what's the difference between Parts Trader and Partly?
It's an interesting one. Parts Trader is a quote-based system, so you will, as a buyer, you kind of put the vehicle you have and the parts that you want, and then you put it out for tender.
Yeah.
Which is a completely different model to ours. We could work alongside Parts Trader in that, in this scenario, Parts Trader would put out a tender for certain parts, and then whoever was quoting for those parts could put it into Partly and say, oh, these are the right parts.
Yeah.
So that's the real fundamental difference. Is it's probably not as tech orientated or as data heavy as we are.
Yeah, cool.
But there are some parallels.
Yeah, I knew that. I was just hoping that we could discuss that and get it off and answer these questions. So this is a beast of a product, man. Like, how do you eat an elephant, right? One small bite at a time. So talk me through, like, what was the first sort of small bite that you take?
Oh, that's a hard question.
When you realised your niche,
how
did you go about starting there?
We've probably taken bigger bites than we should have, if I'm honest. So we did try and eat the whole elephant at once.
That's the startup journey, though, right?
To a certain point. I mean, the way we've actually broken it down is said, let's solve it for a certain type of part, and that was mechanical parts. It's a very constrained set of parts.
Yeah.
And then constraining the customers we work with as well. So we said, number one, we're going to work with the big supply aggregators, the biggest supply aggregators in the world. A supply aggregator is someone who has a lot of different suppliers, meaning they are quite large and they get a ton of value out of a common language or a standard.
Yeah.
And so that was, for us, that was the eBays of the world. eBay was one of our early customers.
Yeah.
And we were able to come along, just focus on a specific set of parts and then just focus on eBay. And kind of grow it out from there. So we then started onboarding all of their sellers. We would help structure that data, link parts to vehicles, push that off to eBay, and then buyers could come along and find the right parts. That was a good starting point for us because eBay already had something. They weren't they didn't come in completely green, and so we were able to build on what they had, make some huge improvements while kind of simultaneously building out that structure. Yeah, and we had some customers before eBay, but they were also marketplaces.
Yeah, awesome. It's one of those things that when I first read about Partly, I was like, why hasn't someone done this before, type thing, And it's that's I guess when you've got a great product in the making, right? Is when people are asking that question. Why do you think that? Why is that the case? Like, is it just because we had the common marketplaces that were doing everything, and so? Yeah,
I mean, we spent the first year after founding Partly asking the same question. We honestly thought we'd missed something. There seems to be a few reasons. The biggest reason is the technical problem.
Yeah.
Actually, after doing a bunch of research, we found there's hundreds of companies that have tried. We're not the first company to come up with the idea. But most of those companies have failed or failed because they massively underestimated the problem, or they were approaching it in a really bizarre way, trying to build a marketplace from day one, which is just craziness.
Yeah.
And so I think it isn't like it hasn't been solved. If we tried to do this 5 years ago, I don't think it would have been possible. It's hard to describe how difficult the technical problem is. The only way we've managed to take terabytes of human-generated data, like there's over 1 billion links that humans have generated one by one. Like a human has gone and said, this part fits this vehicle and this vehicle and this vehicle. This part is identical to this part. There's 300 million of those.
How do you guarantee that that's not an error on human part, right?
That's what has been so difficult. So we kind of had the whole language model thing. I mean, we don't have our own language model now. It's all OpenAI because it's so much better than ours.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But those language models were super good at transforming one format to another, right?
Yeah.
So from an OEM format or an aftermarket format to our standard.
Yeah.
And so that allowed us to kind of 10x that. We built out a graph neural network off the back of Pinterest's algorithm, right? They wrote their original paper on graph neural networks at scale for multi-billion node graphs.
Yeah.
And that was only 6 years ago. And so we took that, heavily modified some of the way it worked.
Yeah.
And without that, I don't think we could have done this. And then same with other things. We use Rust as a programming language a lot to handle that scale of data. It's all cloud. It's Kafka. I'm saying a lot of kind of technical terms here, but for any technical people, it's a super exciting problem, but it wouldn't have been really practically that solvable at least 10 years ago.
Yeah, Rust. Shout out to Tim. He's out there repping himself now. I think he's got an online dev course or something that he's running now.
Yeah.
And so getting into the the business now, right? So obviously you've had a couple of raises now. You just had a big one, man. Congratulations, $38 million. How did that feel? I imagine it gets easier asking people for money the more you do it, right? How did it feel the first time you went out and did a raise asking for money?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it changes a lot. You get much better at articulating what we're doing. The level of ambition started super high for us, but I think it's got even higher as we move forward. I think right at the start, I famously said we're pretty unlikely to succeed. I think the odds of succeeding here were less than 5%, which I believe was true, and I still think.
You didn't say that to investors when you were raising money.
I didn't say that to investors. I was probably a little bit too honest, actually.
95%.
Yeah. But I don't think they thought it was any higher than that either.
Yeah.
At a certain level, it doesn't matter because the upside's so high. And so I think that was probably where we started. I just thought the odds of success were so low that I was pretty willing to take any money, just something to get us up and running.
Yeah.
By the time we hit that, so that was the pre-seed round. By the time we hit the seed round, I think there wasn't much revenue to back up the feeling.
Yeah.
But I was quietly confident that we were going to
10% by this stage, or 15%.
I think I was at 20%. I think I said at the time. Again, I said this. There's probably a 20% chance of us actually doing this.
Yeah.
And then, sort of 12 months later, end of last year when we did our Series A. I think we're over 50-50 now. I think there's probably at least a 50% chance that we'll be able to pull this off. And that's because we're doing it. We've got good revenue now from some huge companies. And when I say pull it off, I mean really actually achieving our potential.
Yeah, and this is like the stuff that I've read about you. I fucking love your ambition, right? And I love you just open and honest and talk about it, right? And we'll get into that in a second. But what is the big audacious goal now? Like, because I've heard and seen in articles that you're like, we're going to be a huge company, and.
Yeah, I mean, I believe that. I think we are going to be a huge company, or at least there's a 50-50 chance. 50% chance we'll be worth absolutely nothing, and I'll have no money because it's all tied up and partly. And the 50% chance we'll be this crazy huge company. I mean, the goal for us over the next 10 years is to be the network for parts.
Yeah.
Given there is close to $2 trillion spent on car parts, I mean, succeeding here could make us one of the largest companies on the planet, right?
Yeah.
Now, that it makes me a bit uncomfortable saying that, because it's so, overly ambitious to the point where it's probably not super reasonable.
But what startup founders are reasonable?
Yeah,
right?
I mean, exactly, and it is first principles. Maybe you can question whether or not we can actually execute on that. Sure, I question that as well, right? That's what we're trying to do. This is why we have to work super hard.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a lot of other barriers in the way, but from first principles. It is a huge market. We have done things that no one else has done here. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of very good reasons to believe that can happen. Yeah.
Awesome, man. So $38 million now, what does that get you? What are you going to be doing with this money?
Yeah, so I mean, like most things, it goes into the team. We've got an office in London now, in Waterloo, where we're building out the team over there.
Is it a sub office, or is it like a satellite office, sales office, or?
It's growing into its own independent office. Right now, it is mostly sales, marketing, account management. Yeah. But we will be hiring more technical people over there. We'll be growing out into its own its own thing. I spend a lot of my time over there now, so a lot of that money is just going to building out the team, hiring more engineers. Yeah. As I've said before.
Do you hire in location? Do you hire remotely? Do you both?
We are pretty office first still. We now have an office in Auckland as well. So we've got Auckland and Christchurch and London. Yeah. We do a little bit of remote, and people can work remote.
What's your stance on that? Because I'm an office first culture person myself. I think, if you want to do a little bit of work from home, great. But I fundamentally see the differences between startups that have office culture and a remote culture. And JD from Reagan actually said this on the podcast. I think he said, to quote him, if you're under 25 and you're only working remote, you're drilling holes in your own boat, just because you're not able to network and understand and figure things out together by osmosis and problem solve. And so, but what's your take on it?
Yeah, it's controversial. I am categorically office first. The bigger you get, the harder that is, and the less I think it is even possible, and it makes sense. I think there are certain business models that can work quite remote. But the reality is, when you're trying to solve super hard problems, when everyone's on a mission, you can't. I think you just can't get away from the idea that being together in the same place, learning through osmosis, having these conversations, overhearing things, it's just too hard to build a remote culture or structure things so that actually works when you've got 500 other fires, everything's changing underneath you. I can barely keep on top of things. As for designing this really well structured, remote first, it's just a pipe dream. It won't happen.
And I think, and that's okay, right? Like, I think if people want to work in remote, work on remote. If that's your thing, right? But if you want to work in an office, work in an office. And as a founder, I think we've got to get back to the place where we can feel comfortable and confident to say, we're not fucking doing remote, or we're only fucking doing remote, right? And so, that for me is when you have a good, just natural culture, right? When you don't have to try and pretend to be anything else. You can just say, this is our culture.
Totally, 100% agree. Yeah.
And so what is your culture then? Like, how would you describe the people of Partly? Like, if someone's listening to this and thinking, oh shit, I'm going to go and check out their job board. What's the job? Is it partly.jobs or something, I imagine?
Sure. Yeah.
So what's the culture like?
It's hard to describe culture. Culture is kind of how everyone behaves. But I guess we have a few things that I'd say really do define our culture. Number one, we care a lot. Everyone at Partly cares deeply.
Yeah. What does that even mean, though?
What that means is, can you get more clear than just caring deeply? It means
they care deeply about the problem they're trying to solve.
They care deeply about the problem they're trying to solve. Everyone is very, I think, pretty proud of what we're trying to do, right? Everyone's very much on a mission. We're all super bought in. And I guess maybe to answer the question, what does caring a lot actually mean? It means you're not optimizing for looking good. You're not optimizing for kind of the key metrics. You're kind of optimizing for success as a whole. You're going home and falling asleep thinking about the problem, and then coming in and going, why don't we do this? I had this great idea. What about this? You'll debate someone. Someone says, I think we should do it like this, but you care enough to say, no, I disagree. I think I don't think that's a great idea because of X, Y, and Z. And then I think, if I had to pick one thing that defines the culture, it probably is that we care a lot. If I look at Partly as a team, it is a super high performing team. We do have a really high bar, as I've said earlier. But I do think that's a really good thing, because everyone on the team knows they're going to be working with the best people hopefully best people in the world at some level. And if they're not, then that person won't stick around at Partly for very long, right? And maybe that's overly rigid, but if you think about the alternative, we have people who are not the best at what they do. And if you are the best at what you do, then you're going to be kind of helping drag these people along. Now, when you have got those people, we give them everything they need, right?
You've got to protect them, right?
That's right. It's freedom and responsibility. Give them as much as we can. Make sure that people are paid super well. Everyone at Partly has options. Like 100% of the Partly team have got skin in the game. They've got stock. This is why we've got a really nice office. It's why we won't take any shortcuts there. It
is a nice office too. I had a virtual tour when the email came through, man, and it was awesome.
I agree. I think it's a great.
Why did you do that out of interest, like that virtual office tour? Was it for marketing to people, like for potential employees, or?
That's a good question. Why did we do that? This wasn't my idea. It was Harry's, and it's turned out to be a good idea. So I don't even know the answer. I think he was proud of the office. It's a nice space to work. It's something you can look forward to coming in and.
Yeah, it's really cool, man. I wish more startups did that because, like, for me as a recruiter, right? Like, if I'm representing Partly, I can't represent them until I've been in your office and sit down and met with people because I need to be able to tell the whole story, like, and this is what it's like, and this is what the office is like, and the likes. And so I think companies should be better at doing that stuff, you know, like, because culture is like, you know, it's a loose word, right? But culture is, you know, like, how do you work together when you're in the office? How do you solve problems together? What's it like? And so culture is not pool tables and fucking bullshit, right? And so, yeah.
No, it's absolutely not. But it's very easy to get those things conflated because, you know, if you've got amazing people, you can give them the pool tables and then, you know, everyone cares a lot. We're all working super hard. But when we want some downtime, then great. Like, you know, you've got all the
toys to play.
You've got all the toys to do that, right? And so I think, there are a lot of ways to confuse all of these concepts, right? It's not a concept it's not a culture with very little trust. It's an extremely high trust culture.
Yeah.
We say a lot of freedom and responsibility. One of our core values is assume best intentions.
Yeah.
But then, you know, you also have to back that up with saying we actually do have the best, you know, this exceptional world-class team.
Yeah, man. And I'm a massive believer, and you've got to protect that by making hard decisions on hiring, you know.
Yep.
We look at the Netflix culture, right? Like, everything on their careers site was put there to push people away because they didn't want people to apply, you know, if they didn't like lift the culture, you know.
Yeah.
And so, and the same thing, like Canva, you know, like their original team, ex-Googlers and the likes, their programming hires, the engineering hires, where it was almost impossible to get a job there back in the day. And you know, you build strong cultures because of that. And so, but it's hard not to just hire people, especially when you've got investors breathing like down your neck and external pressures, you know, with you're the next greatest thing, right?
That's right. I mean, it's not like it's news. I think everyone kind of knows you need to maintain a high, like, don't sacrifice talent density.
Yeah.
But what isn't as obvious is what that actually means in reality. It means you hire quite slowly. It means you have to go out of your way to find these amazing people, and you do have to really look after them.
Yeah. Where did you learn this, mate?
I don't know. I think I probably think things through from fundamentals a lot. That's probably one of the things that I'm bad at a lot of things, but one of the things that I'm quite good at is reasoning things through from first principles and kind of breaking problems down and understanding them. And my experience with amazing people is, you know, A players hire other A players.
Yeah.
And I made a lot of mistakes at Partly in the early days. I think some of those mistakes were made right back at Rocketlab, looking at Rocketlab's culture.
Did you just try and copy it straight away?
No, I didn't actually. I did a lot of things very different to Rocketlab. Amazingly, Rocketlab didn't have much structure, and because it didn't need it. It was the goals were so clear. Get the rocket, put it into space, right?
Yeah.
That's the goal. So everyone kind of just did what they needed to do, and there were some low performers actually, and so it was kind of off the back of that you know you just saw how you know much of a negative effect that could have.
Yeah.
There were also some of the best engineers, the best people I've ever met at Rocketlab, and it was those people that made the difference, right?
Yeah.
It was probably a small number of people that really defined success for Rocketlab. And I think that kind of also made it really clear you don't want to be everyone's friend, right? You don't you don't want everyone. There's a small set of people that are going to be amazing for your company, for Rocketlab or for Partly. So yeah, I think it's probably just over the years spending a lot of time hiring, a lot of time interviewing, and then making mistakes that you know you have to learn these lessons.
Yeah, it gives you confidence in your decisions going forward.
Yeah.
What keeps you awake at the moment now, man?
Oh, a lot of things keep me awake at the moment. It's still 50-50, remember?
It's pretty good odds, though, considering it was like 5. Yeah.
Yeah, it might even be optimistic. But I think the thing that keeps me awake the most at the moment is how we scale the team. So we're over doubling every 12 months at the moment from a people perspective. This is now bigger than any team that I've run.
Yeah.
And it's also at that inflection point from a kind of communication standpoint.
Yeah, where everyone's not around the same table anymore, right?
Yeah, we've got customers in a lot of other countries. You have to be more remote when you do that.
Yeah.
There's just no other option. And so how do we kind of take that culture and move it across? How do we make sure that people don't start to feel like they don't have enough context?
Is that why you're in London? Because to bring that culture and to create the performance culture of that team?
That's exactly right. Yeah. Exactly right. Culture, context, kind of like trying to build this really tight-knit team that can actually scale independently is not possible to do without someone, probably myself, co-founder, going and starting it. And
they don't feel like a stepchild, right? Like
that's right. They don't feel like a second-class citizen.
Yeah. It's a better way of phrasing it.
Yeah, that's a terrible way of phrasing it, isn't it? Yeah. All kids are loved equally.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
That's right. That does keep me up at night because it's very hard. It's not a problem that is really solvable.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem that I get questions about every single weekday. It's like, how do you scale culture to other teams and countries? And when people aren't, when the original team's not around the table anymore, like how do you worry about the communication message going to different teams and losing its, integrity? And I'm like, fuck, man, no one's nailed it, right?
No, that's right. No, I mean, there's always room for improvement. Companies that have done it well, you can look at, but they've got their own unique company and their own unique way of doing things, and it doesn't translate well usually, right? It definitely does. That keeps me up at night. Yeah. And I think all the downstream consequences off the back of that, right? Can we maintain this level of growth? We're growing super fast.
Yeah.
Last year our revenue grew a lot.
Yeah.
Can we keep that up, right?
Your revenue numbers public?
No, they're not. No,
okay,
I still don't talk about revenue. Just say that they were good.
That's right. That was my preemptive question there.
Yeah,
we'll edit this part out. No, mate. And so, how do you feel? Like you seem like the type of guy that you're quite calm and collected, right? And like a duck on the pond. But there's a bit of pressure when you're in New Zealand, right? You constantly, like, people are looking for the next Rodri, or they're looking for the next, push pay, or they're looking for the next whatever it is. How do you take that pressure?
I don't.
Do you feel it at all?
No, I don't feel. I don't really think.
Good.
I don't think about it too much. Yeah. The bit that makes me the most uncomfortable is probably maybe it's the whole tall poppy thing. I wouldn't have done this a couple of years ago.
Done this podcast?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just because I really like these unassuming people who just sit down and get shit done.
Yeah.
Right? They don't
drink the Kool-Aid.
They don't drink the Kool-Aid. They don't go out there and talk about these great accomplishments.
Yeah.
They just do amazing things in the background. They really make shit happen.
Yeah.
And I think it makes me kind of so uncomfortable starting to do this, which I now think is important. It's important that people hear about the mission. It's important that I fully commit. I say, well, this is what I'm saying internally. This is what I actually believe. Sure, maybe we'll fail, right?
Yeah.
But if we fail, at least I've said what I think is possible.
Yeah.
We're giving it our best shot. And so honestly, I kind of think, wow, if we fail, then we fail. I don't think we will now, but if we don't, the upside is super, super high. And I also kind of think it's important. As I said right at the start, one of the biggest learnings from Rocketlab was that ambition.
Yeah.
There's, you know, look at what are the limits here. You don't have any ambition. You don't do anything. You can never, like, what's the maximum you can achieve? It's nothing, or it's very little, right? At least if you are starting out super ambitious, then there's a chance that you'll do something incredible. So yeah, honestly, that pressure doesn't worry me at all. The real pressure I feel is to actually execute on what I think is possible.
Yeah.
Right. It's not 100 million in revenue. It's not $1 billion company. It's saying, can we actually live up to the potential for partly as a business? And that scares me because that's super, super, super hard. And that's why we, again, are hiring a lot of people who have run huge businesses outside of New Zealand, bringing on people that are way ahead of where we are as a company.
Because they've read the playbook and they've written the playbook, right? And then they're able to come in and teach the playbook to the next level down, right?
That's exactly right. I mean, one of the people, Tony Austin, who's been with us for quite a while now and was kind of at least involved in partly from quite early on. You know, he's run the Amazon business in Europe. He's run Amazon in Europe. He's way ahead of us from a business model perspective. But if your goal is to achieve what we want to achieve, then it just kind of becomes logical.
Yeah.
And then instead of saying, well, maybe we can't bring this type of person on, or they're going to be too senior, that doesn't become the question anymore. It's just, how do we convince them?
Yeah.
That's
something, like you say, how do you convince this person to join me, right? That's something, if I was to quickly summarize every single success story I've read about an American startup, an Australian startup, whatever, it's always been like, they haven't been saying, hey, all right, we've got $200,000 worth of money here. Let's hire seven people and pay them fuck all. It's always been like, who can we get that's $500,000 worth for $200,000? You know, like, who's that one person that we can convince to take a risk on us and drop their salary? And that is that ambition, not only in company size, but in ambition in terms of recruitment and hiring the right people earlier. Yeah. And so I think that's like, why the fuck wouldn't you hire these people and bring them into your business?
Yeah. And actually, I actually kind of do know why, I think, because I probably didn't think the same way. I haven't always thought the same way. If I think back right at the start of the business, I would be less inclined to do this because I thought that, you know, we're the innovators. As we said earlier, there's a certain level of arrogance. There has to be a certain level of confidence to do this sort of thing. And so I think you kind of come in going, you know, we're just going to hire these super crazy hard workers, get them straight out of uni, smart, flexible, can come in and just figure everything out. Yeah. And that is not true. You absolutely need those people, but you also need people who have done it before. And usually when you're innovating, it's not necessarily you're fundamentally reinventing the wheel in all aspects. Yeah. You'll find that there's some specific vertical niche that you are really good at. There's a handful of baseline things that have changed that mean your business is super valuable, or it's just a novel idea. But 80% of the other things, how do you generate revenue? What does an enterprise sales process look like? You know, what sort of relationships do you need? What sort of rigor do you need financially? How do you go out and hire the best people in the world? All of these types of things that you can figure it out, but it'll take you 3 times longer, literally. The best teams, I think, combine those two types of people. You do have to convince these great people to take a bet. Yeah. And
like, what's your take on, like, where I think people, like, when I say that, right, the statement I said before, I probably don't say it to generic middle managers, like, if you know what I mean. Like, don't just hire generic middle managers because they've worked at Canva or Google or whatever it is, right? Like, correct. Hire the niche skill set that you need, you know, and that's what you get.
That's right. And, you know, there's a lot of room for error here where, you know, maybe the company is too big and that person isn't flexible enough to understand the realities of a startup. Yeah. And the realities of a startup is things are moving very, very quick. You don't have time to spend a long time on decisions. Yeah. You know, there's always some big fires burning and you just have to pick the biggest fire to fight. that lack of guardrails or structure can be hard. But as long as you're intentional about the value upside downsides, then nothing beats that, I think, from a team perspective.
Yeah. What's your take on transparency and sharing the data of the company with your employees? What's your take on that?
We're pretty transparent. I mean, because we have an amazing team that we trust, the more context they have, the better. So I'm pretty transparent. As we go out to raise, we sat down, went through the pitch deck with the entire team. I even did, practice pitches and said, this is what I'm going to go off and pitch to the investors with the whole company. And, we got feedback. I got them to kind of think of what are the investors, what do we think they're going to say? And then the flip side goes, we're doing these big deals with, like back when we were doing the UN, the World Food Programme, or, eBay, some of these huge deals. We come back and say, well, here's what they said. This was awful. We did a terrible job here. We need to kind of like pull our socks up. And then they liked this. And even on the financial side, this is what our revenue is. Okay, it's good. It's going up. Happy days. Why did it drop? We didn't have a great month. We lost a customer. Why? I think the more transparent you can be, the better. And there are only a couple of areas we wouldn't be transparent now. And I think that's kind of, like the people side of things. There are certain things you've got to be a bit.
Yeah. Like, it's a lonely place being a people and culture person. You got to keep some shit to yourself.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Awesome, man. And so London now, Auckland, Wellington, hiring across the both. I'm assuming it's mainly technical people that you're trying to specifically, target and hire. Is that?
It is.
What's your tech stack? Rust and.
Yeah, so it's mostly, well, all the high performance stuff is Rust. We, data backbones, Kafka. Yeah. We kind of have this denormalization structure, and we just denormalize and push data out to all these different databases. So we'll use downstream databases, Elasticsearch, OpenSearch. But we use a lot of Node and TypeScript as well for just our generic APIs, all deployed through Kubernetes. So it's a pretty solid stack.
So you're a distributed system, big engineer, scale experience, you should be listening to this go,
it's a really hard distributed system problem, actually.
It sounds super interesting though, man. Like, it sounds like one of those problems that you get caught up in so much because it's so hard to solve that it consumes you, right? And so
it is, yeah. I mean, and this is super nerdy, but from a data perspective, it's there's 10 terabytes of data, about 30,000 foreign keys relationships in this big data set that we have to be able to serve up 1,000 times a second, sub 50 milliseconds almost anywhere in the world. And so to do that, you have to build these super performance distributed systems where we control how data is pushed around. We're not using Spanity or any of these more generic distributed systems. Just because of some of the unique shape of the data. Certain pieces of that core catalog can't be sharded or broken up because they're like this core catalog shared amongst everyone. And so that it creates some really unusually hard problems for a company this early on.
And from fucking New Zealand, right? This is the best part, right? Like, who would have thunk it that, this small team in Canterbury is now solving crazy problems on a world scale that, a lot of people aren't doing.
Yeah, I mean, I like to think that. Yeah, awesome. certainly. That's why the team are so excited about it.
Yeah, awesome, man, awesome. And so, High Tech Awards in Christchurch this week. Lots of things happening. Can I get a bit of a sense of you, like, in terms of like Christchurch, because it feels like a innovative city, and I know that's been their push, the MO from government here, but as a Wellingtonian, coming here, not moving here, but coming here for a visit, it feels that, is that something that you feel as well?
It is, yeah. It's a smaller city than Auckland, but I think it's growing much faster. And there's a growing number of companies here trying to do pretty ambitious things. I do think there's a kind of that unassuming culture where there's a lot of amazing people just quietly working away in the background.
Yeah.
And some of that is starting to show, and some of them are, sticking their heads up a bit like us, right? They're getting a bit arrogant. No,
All
not
right,
arrogant,
Troy, we'll come on the podcast. Yeah.
Starting to make more noise.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think it's there is a lot of really interesting things. There's a lot of amazing people here.
Who are your heroes?
Maybe I'm too contrarian to really have heroes. I don't know. I wouldn't say there's heroes, but there are certain people that I think have meaningfully changed how I think about things. Pete Beck is definitely one of those from an ambition perspective.
Yeah.
I think that was over that couple of years, that was a turning point, going from it's New Zealand, like really, can we really do this thing, to shit, we just launched a rocket, right? The second private company in the world to put a rocket into space. Well, we can.
Yeah.
So that definitely had a big impact. I mean, not really heroes. A lot of the individuals I've worked with, there's a small number, probably under 4 or 5, who I think are just exceptional, amazing people.
Where do you get information from if you can't solve a problem, like on the business side?
Yeah.
How do you go about trying to solve that? Do you talk to people? Do you just research?
I do, yeah. So I mean, that's other people. I think Dylan Field, the Figma CEO, obviously, he's been amazing.
Yeah.
We were super lucky to get him as an investor early on. So a lot of those, like Dylan, Akshay from Notion, those people are super. They just know what good looks like.
Yeah.
I mean, there are some other people. You listen to these podcasts, global podcasts. I'm a big fan of Stripe, the Colson brothers, and what they've done. There's certain people on the enterprise sales side of things, right? I think a company like Snowflake, the tech product it's not that mind blowing, but the sales and the way that the company is growing, like Frank Slootman, super impressive.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's probably not anyone I'd say is a real hero.
Yeah.
But a lot of people who I think are good at specific things that I'll go and just try and understand how they think.
Yeah.
And often when I'm solving problems, I build a mental model for those people. And you kind of think, what would X, Y, Z do? And that kind of just helps reinforce your mental model, because if you frame it like that, it's quite an effective way of stress testing things, right?
Yeah.
You go out to raise money, do our Series A, and I think the first kind of number that came in was raising 8 million on 50, I think.
Yeah.
And you go, well, what would Pete Beck do? Yeah, no, he'd go, this is shit, right? Yeah. Right? Is this a joke? What number do we actually need to make it super easy for buyers to find the right parts globally? This is a hard problem. So I think sometimes just stepping back and framing problems against people that are experts in certain areas, or you really value their judgment, can help a lot. So yeah, less single heroes and more just mental models for a lot of really good people.
Yeah, awesome, man. Yeah, that's good. I like that way you framed that. Hey, so we're sort of nearing the end of the podcast, and one thing that I'm doing at the end now on the season 2 is trying to just give back to people listening with a bit of a nugget, right? And so I'm asking everyone that comes on, if we were to pop something in the show notes below, whether it be a podcast, a book, a person, a thing, an event you've been to, something that you're like, hey, more people should go and look at this. This is something that really did something for me. Yep. Is there something that comes to mind for you? There
is. It sounds left field, but it would be the Life You Can Save by Peter Singer. Bit more, related to the real long-term goals. But I'd say if you read one book, read that one.
Yeah.
And then, I'll say that.
Yeah, awesome, man. Hey, well, it's been a pleasure having you on, dude. It's refreshing chatting with someone who has, good, passionate goals, right, and is just going to go after them, right? And I just love talking to people like that, and I think we need more Kiwi people to go after their goals and be aggressive and go for it, and not to have to work with people like Peter Beck or even you right now, because you'll be that next generation for people of going after it and watching your footsteps, but by trying to just share this information on podcasts and, prove that, anything's possible in New Zealand if you just fucking don't take no for an answer and go for it, right?
Yeah, no, well, I appreciate it, and I definitely believe that's true.
Awesome, mate. Hey, thanks for coming on.
Cool, appreciate it.
Bud. So Levi's gone, and I'm reflecting on that podcast about how interesting it was, and I think it's actually, I think Mike and Raj said on the podcast at the end of season 1 wrap, they called it the lean in moment of like when we knew something was interesting when I was leaning in. I felt myself, I had to literally grip my chair in that podcast because I was really curious, really interested, and just wanted to lean into that conversation the whole way. Super interesting conversation. I love when I chat with people who are doing awesome things, who are authentically themselves and just telling people this is why and this is how and what we're doing. And Levi was evident of that. And so I hope you enjoyed that podcast as much as I did. Thank you so much to everyone that's been on the journey with us. You know, we are not building rockets here at the We Fucking Love Startups podcast, but we are definitely shooting in the right trajectory. And so jump on now and show us some love. Give us a follow. Subscribe to us on any platform, whether it be YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google, whatever it may be. And share the posts around so that we can keep meeting and chatting with these awesome guests. And so from Christchurch, until next time, I'm Troy Hammond. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you soon.
This podcast is produced by John Otaka from Empire Films.